Oh, Sashiburi folks, my name is Gray, this is Consoletronix, where today I'll be taking a closer look at a Japanese company that has had a long and checkered history within video games, from being one of the very first third-party developers for Nintendo's 8-bit Famicom/NES, to fighting bankruptcy in the 90s and nearly being swallowed up by Sega, to today where they rank as one of Japan's largest toy manufacturers and are now owned by Namco. It is Bandai. Probably most famous for their Mobile Suit Gundam model kits and related merchandise. However, in 1999 they would release a handheld video game system designed to compete directly with Nintendo's Game Boy Color, which had been released the previous year. It is the Wonderswan, and ultimately, but probably not surprisingly, it failed to capture much market share from the Pokemon-fueled success of Nintendo's machine. However, Bandai's close links to the world of anime would result in a number of exclusive titles, and the system has a wide cult appeal with anime fans like myself to this very day. So join me as I take a look at what I consider to be the best and worst Bandai Wonderswan games. What better way to kick off proceedings than with a look at an admittedly cut down port, but one that still provides the fast-paced pick up and play addictiveness of its console counterparts. It's Mr. Driller, a favourite franchise of mine since first playing it on the Dreamcast, and this Wonderswan edition has lost none of its charm or playability in the downgrade. Great game. Looking at the lineup of titles that would come to grace the system, it's clear Bandai had learnt the harsh lessons of the console business with the failures of the Playdia and Pippin, which put the very future of the company in jeopardy. This time around, Bandai would pull out all the stops and call in as many favours as possible, and top of that list was Square, who produced not just a number of brilliant small screen renditions of the earlier Final Fantasy games like you see here, but also ports of Saga and Front Mission, often before they wound up on the Game Boy or other systems. I know many of you watching probably aren't all that interested in the vast collection of titles based on late 90s anime that make up the bulk of the games for the Wonderswan, but I'm showing off this game called Ginsu Sayuki that's based on a show I quite liked, as an example of the main problem with the Japanese exclusive system, and that's exactly how import friendly are the games, because if an all-action anime can be turned into a shitty board game, we might have discovered the reason for the system's failure. I never got into Pokemon or its many clones, but out of all of the jump on the bandwagon rip-offs that followed it, Digimon seems to have had the most success, as from what I understand, it's still going today, and Bandai clearly pinned a lot of hope on Digimon fans supporting their system, because there's like a dozen exclusive titles for it. This is Digimon Tamers Battle Spirit, which at least is playable if you can't speak Japanese and, like me, don't know the source material. I was fretting there for a moment after starting this instalment of Taito's legendary Rainbow Islands as the opening played and played, and I began to think that maybe this was going to be another bloody visual novel. Luckily, once you get into the actual game, it's a tip-top rainbow-flinging platformer. But there are a couple of points I need to make. First, you've probably noticed the lack of colours. No, it's not my emulator. When the Wonderswan was first released in 1999, it was indeed black and white only. Sadly, there's no way to play these games in anything other than monochrome, not even on a Wonderswan colour or the later Wonderswan Crystal. Secondly, like the Atari Lynx before it, the Wonderswan could be played on its side for certain games, a feature you wouldn't think mattered all that much, but certainly here, it works really well. Besides the obvious question most gamers have about the Wonderswan, which is, does it even have any games I can play? We must also inquire, does it have any games that actually hold up today and could be ported to, say, the Switch or something? Well, out of all of the great games on this system, the final game released on the hardware, Dicing Knight, is probably the best candidate. A randomly generated dungeon crawler with the gimmick of every time you attack an enemy, dice roll, and whatever it lands on is the amount of damage you deal. I've only been playing this game recently, but this is one more people need to discover. As much as I'd like to, I can't keep putting it off. This video is called the best and worst Wonderswan games after all, and although I am not taking into account the many RPGs and visual and sound novels because of the language barrier, I suppose I have to showcase some of the titles that should be avoided should any of you decide to take the plunge and start collecting for the system. And while I personally haven't found many truly awful games, many of the stinkers may surprise you, like this one, Golden Axe, a really poor showing when you consider the Wonderswan could probably have handled an arcade perfect conversion. So disappointing. For those wondering, this is indeed a port of another classic, this time from Capcom, but rather doing what they've done many times in the past and put Sega to shame, Dai Makamura, or Ghouls and Ghosts, is simply put, a bit shit. And I mean, it's not like you can blame the technology they had to work with, as versions of this game on the 8-bit Master System or even Commodore 64 are still held in high regard. This, on the other hand, is simply lazy. But with this one, will we make it a trilogy of trash? O ye of little faith. This is Judgment Silversword, not just the best shoot 'em up on the Wonderswan, but one of the very best, full stop. An officially released fan game technically, as its developer entered it into a competition where it won first place and the prize was to be published. Unfortunately, by this time in 2001, Bandai were hemorrhaging money and quickly dropped the Wonderswan, meaning only around 500 physical copies of this game were ever released, making it harder to find than a beautiful woman who can cook and clean. You know, in the mid-90s, Bandai were very nearly completely bought out by Sega, which made perfect sense to me because Bandai releasing a black and white handheld to compete with the Game Boy Color and the already out color system, the Neo Geo Pocket, is exactly the type of thing I thought Sega would do. But as for Buffer's evolution, well, this is interesting because I remember hearing a lot about this game many moons ago when collecting for my Wonderswan, and just assumed it was an Alien Soldier style platform shooter. But to my surprise, it's actually a futuristic racer. Learn the route and shave seconds off your time and, well, that's about it really. It's actually pretty fun from the little I've played, but I have to admit I was expecting a bit more considering the hype that surrounds the game. So let's check out how racing should be handled. Sort of. Now, I'm not a driving game fan, as many of you probably know, but Final Lap 2000 hasn't exactly set my pulse racing, and maybe I'm being overcritical with it, but this is like the 5th or 6th installment in a highly thought of string of arcade hits. Considering what the Wonderswan was capable of when pushed, I can't help feeling underwhelmed. But as Namco would one day go on to own Bandai, I wonder if they had any good games on this system. Spoiler alert, they do. With the first platformer of note I've showcased, it's Clonowa, the Namco mascot who through limited sales and lack of promotion have seen almost every game he's been in become rare and unattainable. This is actually the second game in the series before the 2001 PS2 sequel, and although the character, who got a long overdue moment in the sun with remasters of the PS1 and PS2 installments last year, this excellent Wonderswan adventure has been all but forgotten. But if you get a chance, try it, or any of the others. They are all some of the best the genre has to offer. Now, while horror and handhelds have never really been a thing, Bandai would have some unexpected success in the horror genre. This is Terrors 2, a spooky visual novel that I watched a YouTuber play and narrate in English some years ago, and made me think what a great game we'd never see in the West. So here's a quick look at a few others. And here's one you should be familiar with. It's another visual novel, yes, but this time it's based on the classic 1998 movie The Ring, which looks 1,000 times scarier than the shitty Dreamcast version. This is called Uzumaki, which means spiral. It's based on the work of controversial horror artist Junji Ito, which I'm not as familiar with as I'd like to be, but by all accounts these Wonderswan games based on his work capture the atmosphere nicely. And to wrap up this little montage, it's actually a game you can play. It's a port of the Super Nintendo survival horror Clock Tower, Escape the Mansion and Scissors Man in a surprisingly effective 16-bit horror title. We go from the macabre to the melodic now with Beat Mania. And I know rhythm games are most people's least favourite genre, but if there's one thing all Wonderswan owners can agree on, it's that music was not the system's strong suit, to put it mildly. So the fact that this game can not only carry a tune but include lyrics and everything blew my mind when I first played it, and goes to show what the Wonderswan could have done if pushed to its limits. Looking at Bandai and not discussing the property that's most synonymous with it, the sprawling space opera Mobile Suit Gundam, is like mixing your salad fork with your dessert fork, a social faux pas. Sadly though, the reputation of many Gundam games like other popular franchises from Japan such as Godzilla leave a lot to be desired, and Gundam Seed on the Wonderswan, while perfectly playable, never rises above mediocre, becoming another waste of a license that promised so much. I can't end this video on a downer, so how about I show to you one of the best beat 'em ups it possesses? Because whether you're a fan of the long-running pirate-themed escapades of Luffy and his pals from One Piece or not, this is just a terrific one-on-one brawler. And that's it. There were other games I could or should have included, but I wanted to show off a broad range of titles rather than narrowing my focus on the most collectible. And with that in mind, would I recommend the Wonderswan to anyone with an interest in retro or obscure hardware? Unfortunately, the prices of both the system and games have been creeping upwards a while now, putting them beyond the reach of the casual collector. But fire up an emulator and try it yourself and you'll find a surprisingly varied games library waiting to be discovered. So my name is Gray and I'd like to thank you for checking out my look at an increasingly obscure system, but one in which is more accessible than you'd first think. So thank you again for watching, and until the next time, goodbye.